Welcome to the OShow. I'm Laura Babcock, and thank you so much for watching. The clips we put out are ranging between 5 and 50,000 views, depending on the guest and the topic. So we really appreciate the engagement. I just have one question to kick off this month's political panel, and that is, who's running City Hall? Because at this point, I can't quite tell.
Well, it isn't. It isn't clear, unfortunately. Andrea, even when she's present, isn't present, in my opinion. She's not there at the moment. She does have a family health issue that she's dealing with right now, which led to the cancellation, and understandably so, of the strategic priority session. But that was 5 days ago. We've heard nothing. We have no idea where she is, what's happening. As you know, her staff, I understand her staff have not reached out to council, so they don't know anything either. They don't know any more than we know. That's not good. Your point about the city manager, though, is absolutely well taken. The city manager, unfortunately, my view is, because I think she is playing a role. I know that in the last OShow, Mary Lou Tanner said that there needed to be a reset of City Hall culture. And of course, the city manager is the most senior person in charge of that administrative culture, of which there's, almost 8,000 employees. I think she's right. I think that, unfortunately, Jeanette Smith was hired by the old guard to look after the old guard, and they're gone. But Jeanette remains. And I don't know that the attitudes and behaviors have changed. There's a cultural change that is required, in my opinion. And we're not going to get it this way. And I'm watching, I don't know why I'm doing it, but I'm watching a lot of council. And I'm looking for details. Again, I'm watching mostly because it's a new council and I want to see patterns. I want to get to know these people. I know some of them by name, some of them by reputation, but there's a lot of them I'm just getting to know. Anyway, Laura, I think your point is well taken. The city manager is not helping at the moment. I think we may need to make a tough decision here.
Well, you mentioned the city manager might be perpetuating some old guard cultural issues. And as one of our viewers pointed out on Twitter, that famous quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning that no new strategies from this council will matter if we continue to have the old guard culture being perpetuated by the top city staff. But we've seen some old guard behaviors around the table of the actual councillors, and we'll get into the finding against Councillor Esther Pauls in a few minutes. But let me go to you next, Margaret. Who's running City Hall right now?
Cameron runs City Hall. It's every time, every issue seems to have Cameron's fingerprints on it. Every question, Cameron's asking the right questions at council, and he's being true to form, exactly what he said he was going to do and how he said he was going to do it. So you can't fault him. And in the absence of anything else, Cameron's voice is becoming the loudest, it would seem, and that could just be because he also engages very strategically on social media, where he's very transparent in what's going on and sharing what's happening at City Hall. So in terms of that sort of thing, I mean, that was the first person that came to mind when you asked that question, is that Cameron is running City Hall because he's the one who's asking the questions. It was him that, I don't want to go into the Esther Pauls thing because you did mention, talk a bit later, but it was him that put forward the complaint. And that should have, that whole thing leaves me completely gobsmacked in the sense that she voted twice, and nobody picked up on it. Nobody said anything, and it's very open that it's her son. It's a financial issue.
So what you're alluding to for our viewers, and Councillor Pasuta couldn't join us this morning because we had a time change with our show taping, but he weighed in proactively on the Esther Pauls thing, and we'll get to it in just a moment. Kojo, I'll come to you next on the bigger question. But what you're alluding to, Margaret, is of course voting on the police services budget, given that she has a son who is in the police service, and we'll get into the details of that. But yes, that was another finding or reveal by Cameron Kretsch, who seems to be doing a lot of that sort of stuff. So Kojo, who's running City Hall?
I don't know, and that is the problem, and that is the problem. But I think it also speaks to how rudderless our municipal governance is, right? Because when everybody said change, we need new culture, all of that stuff. We got 10 new councillors, and now we don't know what's going on. And I'll give you an example of why I say I don't know. So we have a budget that's going to be approved tomorrow, there's a 6.7% increase. And the same councillors that are saying they do not support this or don't know whether they're going to support it or not didn't have a strategic session before making the decision on the budget. So to me, it's like, so you all didn't meet to figure out what the priorities are so that you could determine how the budget will be spent. So then now, tomorrow, when you are going to vote, what's directing you to say yes to some things and what's directing you to say no to some things? So I have a quote here. Councillor Matt Francis says, there's no way he's supporting this because people are struggling. So why are you supporting the police budget then? Because the argument has also been, if we're dealing with homelessness, mental health issues, some of that money for the increase could be used for that, right? And I use that as one example. There are other places where there are increases. So I just want to know, what is the rationale for voting on some things for increases and some things for not increases? Because then if we don't have that direction, why are you now complaining that we need an increase and we don't need an increase? The last piece I'll add is, look, some of the councillors are also tied to the provincial government in some way, formal or informal. If they are complaining about the hike, have they sent those complaints to the premier, right? So I think when we talk about who's running city council, for me, the answer is, I don't know.
Well, let me, and I'm with you on so many of those, I want to unpack that, but let me just go to Pasuda's email to me this morning. He says, I'm missing a good show. Possible 6.7% tax increase for council's want list, exclamation mark. 4 months in office and still wet behind the ears for the budget process and taking a stand on wants, not needs.
Yeah, I think our current discussion around wants versus needs is a false narrative. Because it's being used by people who are pushing back on changes being put forward by new councillors. John Paul Danko's pushing back, Brad Clark's pushing back, Tom Jackson's pushing back, Esther Pauls is pushing back, as if what these new councillors are asking for is frivolous stuff. Giving the YWCA $2.6 million to look after homeless women in need or women who are unhoused, who might have children, I don't view that as frivolous. But honest to God, if you'd listen to that debate about whether or not that money should be given to them, you'd think they were asking to give them lots of candy. It wasn't good. And then, of course, the media, pick up stories by, and I'll mention John Paul Danko again. I don't know how I'm going to vote, tax and spend, as if, what's tax and spend? You only ever use that kind of phrase pejoratively, because where else do you get money from? That's how it's done. You raise money through taxes and then you spend it. Tax and spend is used in a pejorative way to say that it's frivolous stuff. And it isn't frivolous stuff. People are pushing back on the office budgets of the proposed increase, which will finally get voted on, a final vote, that is. That's grown out of a need, not a want. People seem to think it's a want because they want more better coffee in the office or something, or better lunches. It's about paying staff a fair wage and having enough staff to respond to the needs of residents in the wards. That's not frivolous. That's one of the reasons so much change took place, because people were sick and tired of not getting responses to their concerns.
But whether they're wants or needs, that's subjective, right? I mean, it really is.
Entirely.
That's why we want them to get there and argue about it. We want them to have strategy sessions to lay out their shared values and priorities. And that's not happening. So we are left here on the OShow, as we seem to be every week, trying to decipher the code that is how City Hall is operating and what councillors are deciding on. And we're seeing shifts in voting behavior from councillors from last term to this term It's very, very confusing. And I saw you nodding your head emphatically when I said that, Kojo. I mean, are we experiencing a bit of a leadership vacuum? And that's what's causing some of this confusion. There's no clear direction being set, even from, the mayor has one vote, but has the role of mayor, of leader. We're not hearing even strategic vision being put out publicly in the media that we could somehow juxtapose council's voting decisions based on. I mean, I really feel like there is a vacuum. And to Margaret's point, Cameron's filling it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example, because I like giving examples so that people don't think we're just speaking out of hand. So
right.
I went to
at least you're not saying that you're going to stick to policy, not politics this
time. I went to a certain councillor's town hall, right? And there were about 20 people there, and the budget was not even discussed. And then now I'm seeing that that certain councillor is saying he doesn't know how he's going to vote for this budget. So to me, I ask myself, you have a town hall, like 20 people show up, and I must say, I'm connected to majority of the people that showed up at that town hall.
Is it Ward 14? Is it Ward 14?
Everybody can judge, can make that assessment. and now you're saying that you don't know how you're going to vote. And I think this is the general sentiment. You can look at all the councillors, and I'll say all of them. It's like, how are you connecting your decision-making to what residents want? I understand the general sentiment that people are really concerned about any increase because times are tough. Look, today there's going to be a federal budget, and they're giving one-time payments to low-income folks for groceries. Times are tough. I get that, but as a councillor, as a mayor, it's your responsibility to connect what's happening in government to what people are experiencing. So when you say you are not going to support a budget, but then it's not based on any analysis or any support, then exactly what are you doing? And this is why, again, I say our city is very rudderless, because everybody speaks how they want to speak. They support certain things, then they don't support certain things, then they are speaking in some ways, and it's just confusing. And as Graham said, 2.7 million for the Y. Okay, I'm down for that. But then why are you then going to say that this is something that just came out of nowhere? Right? So that position about a rudderless Hamilton is where I stand.
And let's go further on the Esther Paul's thing, because I think this ties in, and I do want to get to the waterfront trust issue and the media policy from hell that keeps rearing its head. There's a lot going on, but to the point of a rudderless council, we're not seeing the leadership from Mayor Horwath. We can say that fairly. It's been 6 months, whether you voted for her or not. Even Pasuda, who did an event at his farm for her during the campaign, said on the last OShow that he's not seeing the leadership that he expected. So we've got rudderless mayor's chair. That's going to create a bit of a vacuum. Who fills that? Does the city manager fill that? We're seeing definite efforts to do that from what I'm seeing. We'll get into that with the media policy and the waterfront trust and secret meetings in a second. But then we're looking at council. So you have Cameron Kretsch, who is very passionate about the Police Services Board budget. It's a huge budget. He got on the Police Services Board. He, spoke against the budget at the board. The mayor didn't even show up to that meeting. She's also on the Police Services Board. And so he's like, the other counselor other than the mayor and him who's on the Police Services Board is Esther Pauls, a counselor whose son is in the police service. So Cameron went to Esther, we're finding out in the news, and said, what does the integrity commissioner say about this? Is there an issue here? And Esther wouldn't show the communication to Cameron, saying now it's because she wanted, council unity, which I find laughable. And so she doesn't show it to him. So he has to file a formal complaint to get the answer before, all this goes through. And what it says is that, she was told, really, you shouldn't be voting on anything that has to do with compensation or pecuniary interest. And yet here she was doing it. She was weighing in, leaning into the conversation. And so now she's been docked, 15 days pay as a kind of a slap on the wrist for that. If Cameron hadn't done this, how the hell would we even know about it?
How would we know? We wouldn't. How would we know that Bernie Morelli, who chaired the Police Services Board, had a son who was a police officer? How would we know about Larry Deanne having a family member? How would we know about Fred Eisenberger having a family member who is on the HPS? How would we know about Chad Collins, who has a sister who's on the police service, and now Esther Pauls? That's 5 of them. That's 5 that I can name, and nobody said anything except for Cameron Kretsch. And even he had to, as you said, Laura, had to file a complaint with the Integrity Commissioner because he asked Esther, would you please show me the ruling? No. He asked the Integrity Commissioner, could I see the ruling? No, but you can if you file a complaint, which he did, and then he saw it. Remember, Esther has been in possession of this ruling before she was voted on as a member of the Hamilton Police Service. She did not tell her council colleagues of this ruling, so they didn't know. So I've tweeted about this. I'll tell you, if I was a member of council and this happened to me, I would be annoyed. I would feel that I was not so much lied to, but it was misrepresented, and there wasn't transparency, the kind of transparency we voted for, that we're trying to deal with. We're slowly trying to open up City Hall. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be aggressive about. This is not just, oh, well, you know, Esther, she meant to do the right thing, too bad, doesn't really matter. It matters a great deal.
Pasuda, again, he didn't know what we were going to talk about today. He just sent me this rant. He says, Cameron Kretsch taking Esther Pauls to Integrity Commissioner. Good move for building council relationships for city building. I'm trying to, I think, capture his sarcasm in that comment. So here's someone who is regularly on this panel saying that, you know, for him to get the truth for the rest of us and hold her to account for the rest of us and for fairness is, you know, not going along to get along city building, right? That idea of circling the wagons, it makes me bananas. Go ahead, Margaret.
No person with a family member on the force should be sitting on the police services board, not just a counselor. The police have the union to support them. They have police management to support them. The police services board, in my understanding, is a citizen board. It's the citizen oversight. Maybe oversight's too strong, but it's the citizen board that is responding to the police. To have people with vested interest in the police on the police services board in itself is a huge conflict of interest. Never mind the pecuniary interest or anything. I've been saying this for years, ever since I found out that Chad Collins had a sister in the force. That to me is so clear, cut and dried. I don't understand why people don't get it. Everything that's happening since this new council has come in, and I put this to the question earlier about the city manager, has been fighting against transparency at City Hall, and every single councillor who is elected now campaigned on greater accountability and transparency. So I'm not sure what's going on here in terms of where the city manager is going with all of this media and the, what's the other one that just happened? Oh,
she wanted to have the strategic session of council in camera, which Stuart Coleman found out was illegal, right?
No, code of conduct, the advisory committee code of conduct.
Yep.
And John Paul Danko's comment about, well, if they don't want to agree with it, then they don't have to be on the board, kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing what he said. And the idea that people cannot criticize City Hall in any way, shape, or form is utter bullshit.
So, you know, I had to do my homework before coming. And when we speak about the conflict of interest, the great thing is that we have a timeline. There was a resident that wrote an opinion piece to the spec saying that Councillor Paul should not be on the police services board. Then Councillor Pauls wrote a full opinion piece explaining why she should be on there. And I want to read a little part of the opinion piece. It says, city councillors are taxpayers. Does that mean that we are in conflict when voting on the budget? When I read that, I was like, if this is the position you have, and now you've received a written notice from the Integrity Commissioner telling you shouldn't be there, then you definitely do not get what a conflict of interest is. And then she goes on in her opinion piece to say, I spoke to some councillors, some former councillors. So we can take a wild guess who those former councillors are. So to me, this speaks on two levels. One, you do not understand what a conflict of interest is. And two, you are getting advice and support from folks that have done this before, right? So again, if we didn't get this complaint, this is how that tradition of not being transparent, what's the quote you use, going along to get along, and nobody says anything. And the last piece about the budget, I'll say is, look, the police, you know, people can decide what they want to say about them, but this is an institution, I'm talking about the board, that has become a rubber stamp for the police. And anytime there's ask and questions from them, they see it as being anti-police. If people are asking about police accountability, are asking about where money should be spent appropriately, that is not anti-police. That is police accountability and responsibility. So I think having councillors like Councillor Pauls, former Councillor Collins, who have family members in the police, why would you think they want to be on the police board, right? So I think this is what is so unnerving, is that everybody knows that this is a conflict of interest. And for some reason, Councillor Pauls doesn't believe that this is a conflict of interest. And it's very, very, very troubling. The additional piece that I want to add is about this trust that councillors seem to be talking about. I think, and I have seen this at some council meetings, and some of them behave in untrustworthy ways, but then they expect other councillors to trust them. I'll give an example. When Cameron put this motion forward for the Public Board of Health, nobody knew that Councillor Danko was going to put an alternative motion forward. He put it forward without telling anybody. And in that meeting, Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Narendra Nan were shocked.
Yes.
And Councillor Danko said, it's either we go Cameron's way or we go my way. And it was like, how can you do that to your colleagues? Then at a governance meeting where Councillor Clutch's motion is being discussed, everybody is talking about trust. Well, if you didn't trust your colleagues in the first place and you undermine them publicly on an issue that community members have been working on for years, and then now you are asking for trust, what does that mean about you, right? And this is the culture that we are dealing with at City Hall. We undermine people, but then we say we want trust. You have a colleague that doesn't understand conflict of interest, but yes, she says she wants unity. If you wanted unity, you would have done your homework and you would have done the right decision. And yet, we constantly see this happening time and time again.
You're right. She does keep herself involved in the police services budget. She's voted for it twice, and she shouldn't have voted for it at all. And I agree, by the way, with Margaret, that she shouldn't be on the police services board, period. But I know where Esther Paul stands on the police budget. I'll tell you who I don't know. I have literally no idea where they stand on the police and/or the police budget, and that is Mayor Andrea Horwath. She has not commented. She hasn't expressed a single opinion. She has missed 2 votes on the budget. And so nothing has been said about the police services budget. $187 million with a 12-point-something million dollar increase. And I have no idea how our mayor stands on that at all. That is unforgivable. Just finish with Esther. I mean, let's all agree, Esther is not the most strategic thinker at the table. And I'm being more than kind. I've watched her. I've watched 100 hours of this new council. I'm sure Esther is a lovely person. I've never met her. Everybody tells me she's a lovely person. That doesn't make her strategic. And God knows if you watch her commentary, she ain't strategic. She's a cheerleader. She's a cheerleader for the cops. She's a cheerleader for the Commonwealth Games. She's a cheerleader for the old ways, the traditional ways. It's very upsetting. And I will, one last comment and then I'll shut up.
Don't shut up. Go ahead.
John Paul Danko and Brad Clark who literally inhabit the two seats of their predecessors, it's like the Chad Collins, Sam Marula show all over again. And I'm worried about it. I don't know what happened to John Paul Danko, but he ain't the same John Paul Danko that I saw last term. And I don't mean, by the way, I didn't see issues last term, because I did, but that's true of anybody. But there's only one. John Paul Danko, like Kojo said, this captures John Paul Danko's thinking at the moment, in my opinion. If people don't like the code of conduct, they shouldn't volunteer. Really? So that's the new city hall. If you don't like our rules, get lost. Well, maybe our rules need to be looked at. After all, remember, volunteers are held to a higher ethical standard than counselors at the moment, according to the code of conduct. It is insane. And yet, I watched John Paul Danko and Brad Clark fight Cameron Kretsch yesterday, literally yesterday, because he was pushing back on the code of conduct, that we need to revise it. And they're basically saying, yeah, it's fine. And if people don't like it, get stuffed.
And just to add on that, you see, and if folks remember the last term of council, when a resident from, I believe, Ward 2 came to speak about Dundan, what did Councillor Ferguson say? If you don't like the neighborhood that you live in, then, get move out. And now we have a councillor saying, if they don't like, this is, and people, let me say this, people are shocked that Councillor Danko would say something like this. It is not surprising for me, because last term, when you are in a room or a council table with former Councillor Ferguson, former Councillor Whitehead, the list goes on, you get to be the one that is hardly seen. Now that they are gone, now you can bring up your chest and say stuff like that. And that is definitely wrong. What he said was so outrageous, so outrageous.
Well, I think I get asked this constantly, what happened to John Paul Danko? And I look at it in terms of what was going on in the previous council. You had an old guard that was so entrenched, that was so involved in chaos and, secrets, cover-ups, Sewergate, everything else, that the new councillors at the time, Danko and Maureen and Narinder, seemed like a very bright light against that darkness. And so now that top tier of old guard are gone, I think and we've got some people in who are really pushing for transparency, like Cameron Kretsch, who are saying, you know what, let's all get along, but we got to follow the rules here, folks, right? The community wants transparency. Let's deliver on that. I think what that does is the dynamic has changed. I see you nodding your head, Margaret. You want to elaborate on sort of the cultural shift we're seeing on council and maybe how it's affecting their votes?
Well, I do want to say that I was totally surprised by John Paul Danko's comment when he said, then they don't have to. That to me is like the greatest insult that you could give to a volunteer who is giving their time to the city. And it really, really bothers me, this idea that they can't criticize City Hall, that City Hall can't be criticized, or councillors can't be criticized, or any of the people who are working in those functions that are responsible for the infrastructure and keeping us all alive and together, that they can't be criticized. I mean, this is where are we going with this? I don't remember when I can actually point to a time where they said, yeah, the culture at City Hall is great. City Hall jobs are good jobs, but you have to put up with a lot of shit to work there, is what I understand, right? And so we're talking about long-term culture change. How do you affect that kind of stuff? Where do you start doing it? And I've seen, I don't know what they do at City Hall in terms of professional development or know yourself leadership skills or any kind of that kind of stuff. But it would be interesting to know how much they look at themselves and how much of the professional development they do for themselves around working together, conflict management, how can we be better, all of those other things that I know that McMaster engages in like ad nauseum, whether it works or not, I don't know. But, there's this idea that...
Yeah. Neither do they, Margaret. They don't know if it works either because they're not measuring that kind of stuff. Well, let me give you a measure, all of us a measure. that I heard yesterday. So there was the integrity commissioner was hired at $2,000 a session to run training sessions on the code of conduct. This admittedly is during COVID, so there were some sessions done in person and some sessions done virtually. And yesterday, it was an appalling moment, in my opinion, and talk about a glimpse into the culture at City Hall. Councillors, this is on the governance committee or subcommittee or whatever it is. It's not full council. They asked them questions. How many people attended the training? I don't have that number at hand. It's their presentation. This was not a surprise topic. They didn't know. How did the training go? What did people think about it? Because this was about changes, feedback they'd received to modify the code of conduct to make it better and to work better for volunteers, and yet still keep them within rules and so on. Well, did the integrity, because the integrity commissioner hired or ran these sessions. Do we have a report from the integrity commissioner on feedback from the sessions? No. Did we ask for it? No. So we paid probably on the order of $15,000 to $20,000 to run sessions, and we have no idea other than we weren't even sure about attendance, let alone what did they think of the session. I'm serious. I heard it. This is clerks. This is senior people who report directly to the city manager, who was present at the meeting, who didn't know anything. You have to, taking attendance is the least you can do. But then the next level is to ask, what did you learn? So we didn't do any of that. And the fact they couldn't even tell us how many people attended the session says, and the pushback they gave to councillors was just like, what are you bugging us for with asking these difficult questions? It wasn't, oh, I'm very sorry, we'll do our best. It was like, what do you bother? You're kind of bothered. The tone from the head clerk was like, you're bothering us. And this is an indication. I started all this by saying that is indicative of the culture at City Hall on the administrative or side, the staff side. I'm not saying all staffers are like that, but when you have senior people, and the city manager was sitting and Mike Zagaric was there. These are the top brass in the city, and this is the attitude they're giving because they got asked questions they've never been asked before, because the old guard didn't give a shit about any of this stuff, especially if it related to volunteers.
Go ahead, Kojak.
To add to that, I think yesterday's meeting was so. If you watched it, the governance subcommittee meeting, I happened to be there.
Okay.
You know, the idea that volunteers can criticize council and wanting to shut that down, that's very troubling. And it so happened that there were members of the advisory council with disabilities there. And one of their main issues was that anytime they talk to the city about issues that impact them, they are hardly addressed, right? And then you have a city council saying, well, if you don't want to be on there, don't apply. Then to add insult to injury, some of these councillors are supposed to actually attend these advisory councils, and some of them don't even attend. I have been at a number of them, and they do not show up. So it's so unnerving when you see that you have councillors that don't engage, they don't do the necessary leadership training that they have to do. They speak out of turn. They are playing this go along to get along game, not coming up with strategic sessions to figure out what can they do to collectively better residents of Hamilton. And it's so troubling. And the idea that council always wants to hide stuff or city staff wants to hide stuff, this is not a Hamilton issue. It's all 444 municipalities. Because even in Toronto, we just found out that Councillor Maclow, who was fighting to open parks during the pandemic, we had people in the mayor's office saying, do not put out information that will make us look bad. And that is the same thing that we saw here. That's the same thing we saw with the Red Hill. right? So this is an endemic thing that is happening in municipal government, and truly councillors and the mayors should be trying to address some of these things so that people have trust in municipal government. The last thing I'll say, just in response to Mr. Graham Crawford, is I think Councillor Pulse is strategic. She's strategic only on the things that she wants to fight on, right? When it has to deal with COVID issues and mandates, she's out there. I'm the face of this, right? And it's very troubling that on certain things that she cares about, she will be vocal about it. If it's not something that she doesn't care about, she'll stay quiet. So that piece, I think, is a strategic.
So don't underestimate Esther Pauls, right? I know somebody's going to watch this OShow and say, you guys really think that counselors want to learn how to be better leaders, to Margaret's point, how to, function more professionally and have better outcomes? No, some of them just want to be demigods in their own little fiefdoms or kings or whatever the hell it is. They want to stay there for the long run. They know the ticket to doing that is to become incumbents, and they don't give a shit about whether or not they're working well together. They don't care whether or not they're all doing kumbaya or look like a healthy organization. They're there for their own interests, and for some of them, for the longevity. I mean, we've had counselors in there for more than 3 decades, right? How interested are they in the City Hall culture, which we know from studies that were done that the City Hall culture is like circling the drain. They are there for their own particular special interests and for their own careers, and we know this. So I just want to say that I can't sit here and pretend that some of them have the higher motive in mind, because we just see no evidence of it.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree at all. Some of them do.
Well, some of them, I'm not saying all of them don't.
Well, no, but it sounded to me like you were saying all of them, and we don't have that issue. I think a number of us are disappointed that we are not seeing the kind of change even hinted at that we hoped we would see. On the other hand, I have absolutely not given up hope. And besides, if you look at the votes, the stuff that is getting passed is the kind of stuff we want to have happen. It's the debates that aren't so inspiring, but things actually get passed. I mean, I know I said this on a previous OShow and took a little bit of grief for it, but an old guard decision was to not spend any money retrofitting 476 city housing Hamilton units. They talked about it. They decided not to do it. That was old guard. That was when Jason Farr, Chad Collins, people like that. I'm not sure if Tom Jackson was on the board at that time of City Housing Hamilton. This term of council, Narinder Ann has led the charge. She has stepped up, and she's the president of City Housing Hamilton. Cameron Kretsch is on City Housing Hamilton. They've put forward this motion, which we voted on tomorrow, that is going to spend $5.6 million to fix 476 units. Now, do you know how much it would cost to build 476 units at the current rate that council talks about? $250 million. We don't have that kind of money. We may never have that kind of money, but we have $5.6 million. And you know what? We had $5.6 million 4 years ago, too, when we had 476 empty units. And the old guard decided to do nothing. They wanted to play real estate brokers and sell City Housing Hamilton assets to make $5 or $6 million, and then do what? And lose 150 units in the process? I mean, I don't even know how that happens. Actually, I do know how it happens. You become very friendly with people who encourage you to make those kinds of decisions. That's what happens. That has started to change. I don't want people to watch this show and feel hopeless, like nothing has changed.
You're right to call me out, because they did make a good decision on that, no doubt. I guess what I was referring to is when Margaret was talking about, as leaders, you want to have a productive, healthy thing where you can work well with your colleagues. And I simply don't see from some counselors any evidence that they're interested in that level of higher leadership.
Look, Margaret, please.
So I'm talking about City Hall. I'm talking about directors and managers. Those are the people that are, not all of them, okay? They're not all of them, but those are the people that lead the show. The rod comes from above, all right? It's the city manager who has come in and hasn't said, this is a problem, we need to fix it. Culture stinks, we need to fix it. That is number one, right? She didn't come in, she didn't say that, right? So then everybody else just gets to be who they are, and they get to be the people in their little fiefdoms and territories and their budgets and wanting to spend everything or lose it, and totally forgetting that we're running a city and not, a little department. So it's this way in which people moan about it and complain about it, but nobody's taking any active measures to do it. And I would think that that's the city manager's job to do that. Come in, say what's going on here, even if it means training everybody in the whole city to these values.
But maybe the city manager doesn't want the change. That's what I'm. So
It doesn't.
She doesn't want the change. So why she would have done it if she wanted it by now, right?
We go back to council and we say, council, what is it? Is it important to you to have a functioning city hall, to have people who want to go every day with joy in their hearts to fulfill their jobs? Is that what you want our city to be? So then the councilors, the city director is the only employee that they have. It's all on her.
Can I make one point and then over to Kojo? I'm sorry, Kojo, but I do want to make this point because it just struck me. There's a big difference between running a city and building a city. And I think what we voted for was building a city, a better city. I don't want a machine operator. I don't want good machine operators. I mean, I assume when you have 7,500 employees and a $2.6 billion budget, you've got some good machine operators. I take Margaret's point, though. I don't think they're not good enough. We need better ones, and we need a better culture. But what we really need to focus on is building a city, not just, how do we keep the taxes low and kind of just keep the machine going the way it used to go. To hell with that. I mean, I'm concerned about tax increases, but I think if we focus on building a city, like what's the value we're getting for any increases we ask for? What is changing because of this? If people think we're getting status quo for 6.7% increases, I don't blame them for saying it's not good enough. It's what's better because we're going to raise your taxes by 6.7%. Then some people might say, and what does that actually translate into? But what is tangible that makes this a better place for more people? We're doing a shitty job of that. The communications is terrible at every level, by every person, and that's not acceptable. And you know what? Again, I'm sorry, but Andrea needs to lead the charge on this. Otherwise, what's the point of a mayor, for God's sake? She's the one who got voted on by everyone in every ward. All of the others only got voted on in their wards. She has a mandate to do this. She's not doing it.
Kojo?
Yeah, I mean, there are different strands that we've all been talking about, but one strand that I will tag on is, you have to still be engaged in some way, in some form. What I try to do is to give people an insight into what decisions are being made at City Hall and how that impacts them. I'll give you one example. Hamilton Center just elected the first Black, Somali, Muslim, disabled woman in the whole country, and that victory was because we end up we have a system that doesn't respond to the needs of people, right? Whether you want high taxes or low taxes, doesn't matter. But what is happening is that we have a current crop of political leaders that's like the system. So they know they'll be voted in on a threshold. They know they don't have to have regular meetings. They know how to amp up that language that Graham talked about, tax and spend, to animate certain people, but yet they won't spend the money properly. Right. They won't give you the information. They will get along to go along. They will do all of the actions to keep information down, to make it seem as though we are moving forward, but yet we know we are stagnant. And I think that's what people want to hear. And when they hear that, they should do the necessary changes, go and delegate, contact your councillor, your mayor, say what's happening around this issue, get together, organize, and push them. Because when you don't push them, they get comfortable and they feel that whatever they decide is what should happen, right? So I think for me, it's always about, if you don't like something, if you see that things are not going the same way, you get together, you organize, and you push for the change that you need to see in your neighborhood, in your city, and in your society. So that's where that's the thread that I will tug on.
No, and I think that's brilliant, Kojo, because whether it's a speed bump that you need on your street that your counselor's not bothering with, or whether it's the Red Hill inquiry that's still going on that citizens had to push for, or so many other issues in between, we can't just complain about it. And we don't on the OShow. Every single one of us uses our voice to activate for change as much as we can and for progress. So we have to back up our complaints with action, and we all do. But the idea that some of them get in these roles and suddenly they become myopic and it's just about whatever their goals are, and they think they can tune out the rest of the population. I keep going back to, they should have learned on October 24th of 2023 or 2022 that the residents of Hamilton are not going to accept it, that we want that kind of transparency. And I just want to tie off the show. I could talk to you guys all day, as I'm sure. I want to tie off the show with two quick little ideas. If you want to do a quick comment, and that'll be our wrap up. The Waterfront Trust. The desire to bring it in-house so that we can finally crack and get a look at those books that we have all been feeling there's been something, sketchy going on at the Waterfront Trust, mainly because we haven't had access to see how our money's being spent on this thing. What does that look like? Where are you guys with that? And then just lastly, on the media policy, we had a hue and cry on the OShow about that media policy. We got many, many thousands of views, and there were comments all over the place on it. Councillor Maureen Wilson asked some great questions this time of the city staff when they came to present it. It wasn't just this slick city manager where this is what we're going to do. Now councillors are asking the right questions and pushing back on, the tail wagging the dog here, the city manager's office, I think, trying to control what's happening at the city. So just one last quick round, if you want to comment on any of those or anything else as a summary to this month's politics panel. Let's start with you, Margaret. Is there anything you'd like to, and I'll end on you, Graham.
So I'm going to go with the Waterfront Trust and say that it should be public knowledge what happened with all of that money and all of those decisions and where it went. We've got that it's been plagued. I think of Discovery Center and what's been happening with that and how it's gone up and down, and it's a beautiful location and all of these things and what's going on. There's so many questions around the Waterfront Trust that it needs to be brought in-house. It needs to be made public. There needs to be a public audit of those books. And I don't need to have access to them to see what went on, but I need to know that somebody with awareness has, and that they can tell us what happened with the money, what happened with the contracts. And just as a wrap up to it, I mean, we would want to know that, right? This is, I think it's going to go back to something else about, I wanted to say quickly about evidence gathering and how the presentation that they made, that the city staff made, and how the lack of statistics around people who attended and the lack of feedback. I mean, this needs to be baked into City Hall culture, this idea of feedback and evidence. How do we know that, and I'm going to use the offices, how do we know that that money is going to be spent good or spent well? How do we know that it's going to be spent responsibly? How do we know they even need it? Where is the evidence? I want to see evidence-based, actually evidence-based.
Accountability, right?
And so that's where I am with the Waterfront Trust. With the media policy, well, I've said what I want to say about the media policy. I think it stinks, and I think that it's another way to shut people up and out of City Hall.
Agree. Kojo, last thoughts?
Yes, I'll be quick. Waterfront Trust, I think it should be connected to the Hamilton Urban Indigenous Strategy. This should be a place that should be, there should be conversations with Indigenous communities in what we call Hamilton to figure out a way to address the issue of land back. So that would be something that I would look into, and I hope those discussions happen. In terms of the media policy, it's ridiculous. It should be scrapped immediately, and I hope the majority of the councillors vote this policy down.
Excellent. And Graham, final thoughts, sir?
Sure. Waterfront Trust, that's an old guard mystery that's been going on for years and years and years. And no one has, even mayors have tried to break through and try to figure it out, and they failed every time. Finally, we are bringing it in-house, and Margaret's right. We're going to get access to books for the first time. By the way, the city of Hamilton has been bailing out the Hamilton Waterfront Trust over and above what they might get, they might charge us to run the place because has been mismanaged. I mean, it's the only way to describe it, because if you have to bail people out, it's because of mismanagement. Remember, the feds came after them because they hadn't paid their taxes. Came after the Waterfront Trust, and guess what? The city of Hamilton had to do some, fast thinking and so on. So this is good, and this has been that charge has been led by Cameron Kretsch. And I will also mention the mayor spoke against bringing it in house. I think it's because she is so out of touch with what's been going on in Hamilton. She didn't realize how badly the Waterfront Trust smelled. Because it's okay, because she was doing other stuff. Fair enough, but do your homework. Don't speak again.
You have $1 million staff to tell you. I mean, the Waterfront Trust wouldn't even show up at council when they were asked to show up.
No, that's right.
Councillor protecting them, and he lost in a landslide to Cameron Kretsch. So I mean, there's a reason why we finally have access.
They had many councillors who protected them, not just one. In terms of the media strategy, I watched the follow-up meeting. You're absolutely right, Laura. There were great questions asked, in particular by Councillor Maureen Wilson, but also Brad Clark. As much as I've been critical of Brad Clark on this show, he asked some very good questions. And let me just tell you this. I saw the Matthew Grant presentation where the first one, where he came out and was like, I'm a hero. I got all these great ideas. Here's what we're going to do. The Matthew Grant that presented at the second meeting, it was like a different person. He'd been smacked down so hard, and this thing is clearly going to fail. Mm-hmm. He does not have council support, which means the city manager does not have council support, because her fingerprints are all over this. This is not Matthew Grant may be the one thrown under the bus, but Jeanette Smith owns this as much as he does, and it's going nowhere.
Well, if people want more on that, check out last OShow with Joey Coleman, where he goes into it. The clips from that show alone, the comments, not just from Hamilton, but it's bizarre. The policy is so restrictive. The New York Times couldn't cover what's going on in Hamilton. And it seems to be targeted towards independent journalists. It's a joke. It has to be thrown out. It is old guard if ever there was an old guard policy. Thank you all so much. I think we've come to the conclusion that if it's not the tail wagging the dog, meaning the city manager trying to control council, it's chaos that's happening, and we can't quite figure out who the leader is, but we're seeing councillors like Kretsch trying to push for things, and some of them, to your point, Graham, I concede, are very good things. There is reason for hope, but not if we let up, not if we stop watching, because we're seeing this kind of pullback towards these secretive ways, and we have to fight every single one. To Kojo's point, we have to keep speaking up. And Margaret, thank you so much for always your columns in The Spectator and your journalism and revealing what's going on and the hard points that you make about things around even the Police Services Board. Esther Paul should not be sitting on that board, or anyone else who has family in the police force. Thank you all, and thank you to our viewers. You make a difference. We bring things up on the OShow, a hue, a cry. You retweet it and activate it and call your counselors, and then we see a different tone sometimes, and even some differences in terms of votes. So we really appreciate your engagement in the program. And to our panel, please, everybody, keep watching, subscribing, and we'll keep bringing you good content. Take care of yourselves, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Laura.